better roll them dice. You never know if it could change your life. Take a chance, you're neither wrong or right. You never know if you don't roll them dice. You better roll them dice. You never know if it'll change.
Good afternoon, Matt.
Afternoon, Rob, and welcome to Dungeon Master of None.
It's Dungeon Master Summer. It's Hot DM Summer, everybody.
Hot
Finally,
DM.
it is, well, by the time this is out, it will officially be summertime. The solstice is upon us. And we have a very special kickoff to the summer. Well, it's not that special. It's moderately special. It's middlingly special, but it is a mailbag, which you are a little bit behind on. Excited to answer your questions.
As was foretold, it is Hot DM Summer.
Before we get into our letters, though, I want to remind you all that if you're looking for more hot DM action, that we have a Patreon at patreon.com/Dungeon Master of None, where you can find all kinds of cool things, mostly additional episodes, more than a day's worth of additional DM of None content, but also, and not limited to, some of our homebrew stuff, nifty little infographics, cheat sheets, all kinds of things, and more to come. So if you're interested in that, check that out. You can just do it to support the show, but it does come with benefits. So check that out.
I was gonna say it's a great deal, but it's an average deal, I would say. You know,
I think it's a pretty good deal. You know, we are average DMs, but in terms of our Patreon offerings, I say this as somebody who subscribes to an awful lot of Patreons. I would say it is an above average Patreon offering. I think it's a good bang for your buck.
Well, good for us, and good for you for sending us letters for advice. Thank you, listeners. We got a bunch of letters to get through, ranging from GM questions to adventure planning to talk about systems old and new. So let's get started.
Let's do it.
Here's our first letter. Dear Matt and Rob, what's your favorite way to kickstart the action at the beginning of your session? Do you have any stock action situations that you pull out when improvising? Yours truly, Charatsu.
This is a very interesting question, Charatsu, and it's not something that I had thought about a lot, believe it or not, until you asked. So let me tell you a little secret, because I do have an answer to this, but the truth is that I don't have a lot of action start stock situations. I have a couple that I'm going to talk about. And the reason for that is that I tend to leave off either on a cliffhanger or, in medias res. I tend to leave the action somewhere when we pick up next time. The next thing is pretty obvious. So rather than rely on let's get things going, I'm more like, last time our heroes were blah, 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 blah. They're, hanging over a cliff or, being pursued by the enemy or something like that. So my sort of tangential answer to this is, rather than trying to kick off action with, something that you pull out to fire things up, I would say leave your sessions with something about to happen. This obviously only works if you are not doing session one, but that's sort of my way of evasively answering this question.
Similar to that, it's kind of like the anti-improvising, right? You have like a vague improvised idea of, hey, in media res, a cool thing is happening. And then you have a whole week, 2 weeks, month, however long to make that a really tight plan for what's going to happen. So you don't have to improvise the very first scene of your next adventure. You can really fine tune it. So, okay, it's going to be fast and quick and it's going to be over in 20 minutes. And then we're on to the next thing. Right.
This is a great point. You can make up a cliffhanger right at the end, and then you have plenty of time to make it seem like you actually knew what you were talking about. If you leave the session, then you can sort of figure out how that's supposed to fit. This is a great GM cheat.
I think my not good answer to this, but the truthful one, is that I don't have stock start the adventure things. Because I try and keep things, variety is the spice of role-playing games and of life, varied. So I try and tailor my opening scene to whatever scenario or adventure we're at the day, right? if in my Star Trek game we're doing kind of a vacation adventure, right? The opening scene might be like, hey, let's go around the table and everyone describe one of your underlings on the crew. And let's fill out the ship's crew because some of these people are going to be coming with you down to the planet this time. Okay, it's not really an action scene to start, but it's one that invests them in the theme of what's going on today, which is intership relations. Or instead of just like a random encounter table attack, it's a meticulously planned like combat counter. Like in a recent Dungeons and Dragons 5e game, it was a attack of a group of sirens on the ship. And, I was like, this is not like a real normal encounter. This is one where there's like charms and, the players have to come up with a clever solution not to start jumping into the water.
I also have, an answer a bit like this. I don't, with one exception, don't have just sort of like a stock set of situations. However, I almost always know of some encounters and of some social interactions that I either want to happen or that need to happen to move the plot forward. So if my players are languishing or if I need to kick things off. So for my cyberpunk game, here's a good example, right? Often this is like a phone call. So, or their agent blows up and one of their contacts is like, hey, I have a problem. Can you all get on this? Or it's like a flunky of their main enemy has been stalking them. And this is the moment that they take to start, firing on them from, a rooftop or something like that. Like usually I try not to make it so out of the blue, but if the session is really like dragging and I need to, step it up, then I will be like, okay, I'm just going to move this moment forward a little bit. And so I have, we've talked about nodes and flowcharts and, points rather than railroading. And so the nice thing about that is that if I have these moments that I'm hoping will happen or sort of like fit into the plot, then if I need to kickstart the action, I can just sort of like pull one of those forward and be like, okay, instead of this person attacking at the warehouse, which they are taking hours and hours to get to, this person is actually outside their apartment. And that's an easy way to spice things up, to move things forward. So I like to have encounters or especially like NPCs that need something waiting in the wings so that if I have to move things forward, I can just, shuffle some stuff around and then get the game going again.
If you didn't plan like Rob did to like, hey, we left off and a thing was about to happen, you can still kind of do that using the cut to the action principle for your starting your session. You're like, okay, we know, just to recap everyone, you were doing this, and then this is where we pick back up, cutting to the next interesting thing. And for me, I kind of try and think about what are the themes of the campaign. And if the themes are like social encounters, exploration of like weird stuff, and combat, I would like to keep my first opening scene or node as hitting on one of those three things that my players like to do. So if you're using like improvising or random tables, think about a random table or a list of what are the like types of scenes your players like to have in this whatever campaign you're running.
One exception to this, Shiratsu, is that in a OSR game, like for example, in my Shadow Dark game, if I will usually not just do this to start the session, but if things are going slowly, there is many random encounter tables, and if it does not actually feel like a random encounter because the game is built like that. So if things need to start moving, I will roll and be like, great, here's what happens. And those aren't always combats. There's also, you find this or you encounter an NPC. But for OSR, a dungeon crawl or hex crawl type games, those are ones where it's really nice just to have an encounter table. And if you need to kick things off, just roll on it.
I think even if you don't want to have some kind of kickstart the action encounter, right? So you don't have like a social encounter or a combat encounter that makes a ton of sense for you, but you still want the action to feel urgent, right? Since it's the first scene, you have a lot more control over where and what the the players are doing. If it's a planning thing, right, you can still frame it in a way that seems like ready to kickstart the rest of the session, right? All right, you've arrived at, the captain's table on your ship, or you're at you had reached the peak of the watchtower and you're surveying the land. Here is what you know, right? Here is what you don't know. Now is the time to plan your adventures, right? Have your council, and let's set the stakes. Let's go around, everyone explain what their character wants, and then we'll have that discussion in a kind of high energy, high stakes way, and then go from the rest of the session from there. So even if it's like a planning thing, you can still frame it in a way that really kickstarts the rest of the session, which is, I think, what the letter writer, what she wants.
I think so. It's a good question, Shiratsu. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the great question.
Our next letter is from Andres. And Andres writes, on Mike Shea's Lazy DM Discord server, we were discussing how to fix
Vecna, Eve of Ruin.
I ejected the title from my brain. Vecna, Eve of Ruin. And one of the topics that came up was the first image in the book of a human Vecna and Kaz, and people commented that it looked like they were on a date. They are. Yes. So the topic took a turn to Kaz being a jilted former lover, and hence his reason for hating Vecna. Andres also includes some ideas. They even made a whole site full of ways to incorporate that. We'll include it in the show notes.
Mike Shea did, and with contributions from people on the Discord.
Yes, it will link to that. Very cool. I think we didn't mention this only because we were too angry about other things. But yeah. I consider it to be not like subtext, but text, that they were gay lovers. Like it seems very obvious to me that not only does that make sense, but it's intended. You can read it however you like, but this seems like there's so many problems with Vecna Eve of Ruin, but one way to make it slightly more interesting on like a base level is to make the relationship between Vecna and Kaz a little bit more interesting and dynamic. And this is, to me, an obvious way to do it.
I think one of the brilliant things that evolved in the discussion that Andres and others had that brought this is the ritual. Vecna's evil plan is to return to a time before Vecna and Kaz were totally corrupted and evil, and when they were just kind of evil, and they were having a fun time taking over the world before they got involved in insane lich and vampire overlords and trying to take over all the universe, right? Move things back to and that's, I think, a little more interesting motivation than take over everything everywhere. It's like, what about
it's also a bit more, it's sinister in a different way. It's also a little bit more human, it's still something that you want to stop. But yeah, I keep saying, there's many problems with this module that need fixing, but starting here would be a good way to begin to work on it. And I think this is an interesting effort.
I think we'll also include a link to my complete Vecna Eve of Ruin remix. It is now sitting at 17 pages long, full of advice on how you might restructure each part of the module, what you might use and what you might discard, how to maybe change the overall structure to allow for more player agency and interest, and how to change the final fight and final encounters to be more interesting, make Vecna more proactive. All the things we discussed in our 2 episodes reviewing it have been compiled and are in a document that we'll link in the show notes to this episode if you're interested.
Matt has a much higher tolerance for suffering in this realm than I do. I've literally not devoted a single second of thought to Vecna Eve of Ruin since we stopped talking about it 2 weeks ago. But I do think that if you want to, what was it? Something, I don't know. I was reading something the other day. I don't remember what it was about now, but there's something compelling about mediocre things they're flawed or mediocre in interesting ways. And I guess Vecna Eve of Ruin is one of those. There is sort of like a neat challenge in trying to fix it and trying to unpack like what's wrong with it. So
yeah.
Depending on like whether or not this is the type of challenge you enjoy, I do think that there is a lot that you could do here. So check this out. Check out the show notes. It is possible to salvage this adventure. It's just so much, in my opinion, so much harder to salvage than just about anything else we have reviewed.
It's on the other side of the line of too much work. But I mean, what is too much work? It's going to depend on you,
right,
the person who has to run it. And I think for most DMs, it is way beyond the reasonable line. But, if you're up for a challenge and you really like the concept, I think my guide's a pretty good way to take it on.
Thanks for the letter, Andres, and for the links.
Yes. Yeah. Excellent stuff. All right. On to our next letter. Hello, DMs. I would love to hear you two talk about Deadlands. I've got a lot of personal experience with the original system and love it, jank and all. I know you've briefly touched on the Savage Worlds version of Deadlands, but I feel like the original system has a lot to offer. Love the pod, Alex.
This is a really good question, and unfortunately, I have to admit that I have little to no experience with the original Deadlands. I'm reasonably familiar with the Savage Worlds one, but I'm aware of the existence of the original, but I have spent almost no time with it.
I have to admit, for me, reading through the original Deadlands, speaking of whether there's like enough good stuff to salvage or it's too much work, for me, like one thing that I truly, truly hate is the lost cause theory of the Civil War and Southern history. And for the original Deadlands series, like it is like baked into maybe not every page, but almost every page, right? The original Deadlands series like sets up a, Weird West that never was with, monsters and magic and stuff like that. And it's kind of set up as like a Cold War between the Union and the Confederacy. And they're given like, they're both awful in their own way, kind of superpowers. But the Confederacy is kind of rewashed through to get real nerdy with you, like the Dunning school of understanding of Southern history. And I just personally can't stand reading about that, even in a like tongue-in-cheek, funny, Weird West way. And for all its faults, the Savage, there's still a lot of like things that are maybe not great about the interpretation of U.S. history in the Savage Worlds Deadlands edition. They've they got rid of the Confederacy stuff, and for me that was a huge step forward, and one thing I really like about the Savage Worlds edition.
For what it's worth, for my part, I agree extremely strongly with Matt. And as a Texas boy and somebody who was born and raised exclusively like west of the Mississippi, like I am the American West, the depiction of it, Westerns, is extremely important to me, and has a lot of like sort of like personal valence on my life and the media I consume. And I also find the Lost Cause narrative to be like deeply frustrating and annoying, and even like it's bad enough now that it was hard at times for me to enjoy Firefly, which isn't really even about that, but
it's not even about it.
Has enough like echoes that I still found it kind of irritating. I've read Regeneration Through Violence twice, and all of these, like, I'm deeply steeped in this, and so I really like what the Savage Worlds has done with Deadlands. I think it really captures the Western feel, the Western aesthetic. I think this is probably also why I bounced off of the original Deadlands all that time ago. That does not mean that you can't enjoy it. I could name a dozen things that are equally problematic or that draw from problematic histories and understanding of the past. But this one, like Matt, I find this personally bothersome. And so I really like the Savage Worlds Deadlands, but just didn't have much of a taste for the original.
The jank that I think Alex refers to that I love the most in the original Deadlands is the mechanic of building poker hands to cast your spells. Like, that is so cool.
Yes.
People should bring that back for another thematic spell casting or other system. That's just neat. And of course, incredibly cumbersome and stuff like that.
Right.
But still, what a
fun mechanic.
Fun idea.
We got to talk about that in our whenever we get around to the episode on non-dice resolution mechanics, because that's a fun one.
Well, thanks for the letter, Alex. There are certainly enough Deadlands supplements from the original one that you can find some really fun stuff to add to whatever game you're running.
Thank you for the letter.
Yes.
Our next one comes from Neil. Neil writes, just a note to say how much this British GM enjoys your podcast. Thank you. I particularly enjoyed the Kickstarter Grifter episodes, but in defense of the project I've backed, I've always received what I've paid for and sometimes considerably more. I've recently subscribed to a Kobold Press Kickstarter, and I'd be very surprised if it failed to arrive, and I'm sure it will be great when it does. Best wishes, Neil.
Neil, thanks for the letter. And I have to agree. Rob and I are frequent backers of board game and TTRPG Kickstarters. We almost always get them.
I want to be clear about since doing that episode, here's a list of Kickstarters that I have backed. Hellpiercers, a tactical harrowing action. Gubat Banwa, which is a Southeast Asian fantasy tactics RPG. Jukebox, the karaoke musical tabletop role-playing game. Of all the ones I'm listing, that's the one I'm actually not sure I'm going to get, but it was $20, so I was like, whatever. And then
that sounds ambitious, but cool. Street
Wolves, the synthwave powered Savage Worlds setting. And then Heat, high excitement action tabletop. So if it the reason why we go hard on Kickstarters that fail is because we are suckers. Matt and I, I'm pretty sure we admitted this, but have both backed and paid for things that we have not received. And so don't ever feel bad about kickstarting anything. I think that, that it has allowed a lot of things to come to light and be created that never would have existed otherwise.
Absolutely.
And I think even though Kickstarter is shady as a company and many of the Kickstarters that are popular kind of suck, that I still think that it is a pretty cool system that allows for some grassroots creation of interesting projects. So we are going to continue to make fun of Kickstarters that fail and are bad, but we like Kickstarter and we like kickstarting products. And so don't ever think of it as like, just be careful, I guess is what we're saying.
Yeah, I would be blown away if the Tales from the Valiant, which is, I assume, the Kobold Press Kickstarter that Neil refers to, fails. I think it's basically already done. And if at this point, I did not kickstart it, but I will absolutely buy the PDF when it comes out, because honestly, there are enough not D&D systems that are coming out this year that are kind of gunning to be a replacement for D&D or D&D 2024, 2014. That I think an interesting episode would be a discussion and comparison of all of these. I'm sure the Kobold Press one will be out very, very shortly. In fact, Rob, of the ones we talked about on our Kickstarter Grifter episode, the Western Wuxia Far West mashup, after like 15 years, within a month of us being like, it hasn't come out in 15 years, actually came out, and apparently everyone who backed it got the PDF. And the Swords Fall Kickstarter, the setting book, also came out. I actually got my copy. It was a mess, but it was there. The bare minimum of what was promised, not any of the a lot of the add-ons, but so I think it's actually a good sign if we add it to the grifter list, because then it might actually come out.
Right. I mean, we got to eat crow, sort of, I guess, because, but it was funny because both of those had no updates or barely any for months, if
years.
Or
months, yeah.
And then, within 6 months of us talking about them, actually had released, which is either we are incredibly powerful or just very, the luck and timing of that is very funny. So let it be said that, I'd say probably Kickstarter or kickstarting things, more often than not, you're going to get something out of it. It is not an attack on the funding model or the website or anything. It's just, when something gets an awful lot of money and then doesn't, just sort of disappears, which does happen with relative frequency, it's worth commenting on.
Yeah, I think we're like 2 for 4 because 2 of the other ones we've talked about, like Grimmer Space and Sirens Battle for the Bards, don't really seem like they're ever going to come out. We're batting at 50%. Is that good for a podcast? No, it's great for a baseball player. For us. Thanks for the letter, Neil, and we will absolutely, I think, review Tales from the Valiant, maybe alongside some of the other not D&D projects that are coming out this year.
Yeah, there's always more to talk about.
Speaking of Kickstarters, here's our next letter. Hey, Demon, was just re-listening to 2-Path 2Finder in prep to play a Pathfinder 2e game. Y'all mention Paizo's Digital Boondoggles. Quote unquote, a failed MMO and a failed CRPG. Would love to hear an episode that covers these in the same vein as your Kickstarter scams episode. And this is from Jonathan. Jonathan, thanks for the letter.
Yeah, so this is interesting. I would love to cover this. This was a while ago, but it is probably worthy of an episode. Matt, I know that you backed. I don't think I did, but maybe I did. But it did not go well.
It did not go well. It raised, between 2 Kickstarters, $1.5 million or so dollars. They got a lot of people to Kickstarter, and this was an interesting / bad way to do funding, where they gave away a ton of like adventures and new modules from like really cool designers in order to entice people to do the Kickstarter backing. And then, there wasn't like a lot of like rewards in the, most people signed up for that as opposed to rewards for the MMO. So it wasn't really maybe a good gauge of interest. Also, I think we should all know this now. You can't make a MMO game for $1 million. You probably can't make one for $10 million, right?
Yeah.
What's that game that constantly is raising money and will never come out?
Oh yeah, Star Citizen,
right? You can't even make an MMO for $1 billion.
Yeah,
right?
I know.
If it's
Star Citizen has somehow managed to not release or not get out of alpha with almost $1 billion in crowdfunding. So like one that did work is Pillars of Eternity, which was a CRPG, in the spirit of the original Baldur's Gates. But I think it also had other funding. I think the Kickstarter was just sort of like to demonstrate interest and to like help bridge the gaps. And that was also a project that was, plagued with problems. It ultimately came out and it was, in my opinion, a really good CRPG. But that was with an experienced studio with, developers and programmers who had made an RPG before, and it was not their only source of funding. So Paizo is a lot better about this these days, but I do not know what they were thinking when they did this.
There were so many problems with it, which it was set in an uninteresting part of the Riverlands, which is like the kind of generic nothing cool going on here part of Golarion, which every other part of Golarion is like cool stuff be here. And this was not that. They couldn't do dungeons, which is maybe a little bit of a problem. They could only do outdoor environments, and they had really no plans on being able to do it. It looked terrible. The entire model was based on users creating everything, because one of the guys who worked on it came from EVE Online.
Oh yeah.
But like that doesn't work for Pathfinder, right? People want to do quests and missions and not have a complete anarcho-libertarian capitalist space battle, right? They want to craft a sword that lasts them forever. That's their sword. But you couldn't do that. Like every single step of the way seemed like a disaster. And I think Paizo, it could have been very bad for them, but their CEO, I believe her name is Lisa Stevens, set up a new company that basically shielded Paizo
Right.
from all of this problems. So that was a smart move. We might have to do a whole deep dive episode on this, but in the meantime, I'll include a link to someone who played the game and followed its development intensely, and some sort of a citizen forum journalism from someone from Something Awful in the show notes, a link of the history of the Paizo MMO Kickstarter.
Before the Owlcat games, they had other attempts at video games. I don't know. The industry is littered with these failures.
It's about finding the right sort of partner for your game who can translate the vision of the tabletop into something interesting. Otherwise, you get, we've never talked about the D&D Eberron real-time strategy game that is just incredibly bizarre. We never talked about D&D Online, which may or may not still exist.
The reason why I didn't bring it up is because I actually can't remember if it still exists. I think it does. I remember playing it. It was novel. It was neat. I could play as a Warforged. It was Eberron. I don't know. It didn't have a lot to distinguish it from other MMOs, so I didn't keep playing it, but it does still exist. I don't know.
I think the answer, Rob, is that there should only be 2 MMOs. Like, that's the market cap. There should be World of Warcraft and EVE Online, and anything that is not one of those is going to fail. Sorry. People should stop trying to make MMOs.
The moment came and went, and everybody who listen, this is a funny thing to say as
people who liked MMOs and played them together. We were in a guild together.
I have my brother has twisted my arm into briefly re-engaging with Final Fantasy 14. I'm aware that there are other MMOs.
Final Fantasy 14 is allowed to exist.
But really, there's basically 3, right? There's there's some version of WoW, some version of EVE Online, and some version of Final Fantasy. But people should stop making them. The moment came and went. MMOs, that was an aughts phenomenon, like webcomics, like that. Just stop trying.
Crossing out in my notes, Matt and Rob do a webcomic. Fine. Break my heart, Rob.
But good question, and that would be a fun one to do a deep dive on. So stay tuned for that sometime in the future. Thank you, Jonathan, for your letter.
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan. Here's our next one. My players are keen for Kingmaker, but don't like Pathfinder 2e as much as D&D 5e. There's a bestiary converting the monsters and hazards to 5th edition, but what else do I need to look out for running Kingmaker in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition? Lawsworth.
This is... You could not have picked probably a better module to do this with. Not only, like you said, is there a bestiary that's really easy for converting like actual challenges and monsters to their 5e equivalent, but everything else is going to be pretty intelligible. There may be areas where you have to improvise, but once you've done that conversion, almost everything is going to translate pretty 1-to-1. You'll have to port over the the settlement mechanics, but I can't think of any reason why that would be hard.
No. And of course, if you listen to our episode on Kingmaker 2.0, which might be behind the paywall, sorry, it's on our Patreon. I think we have some advice on kind of abstracting the settlement building rules, because they can be incredibly spreadsheet intense, but there's nothing about those settlement rules that means that are like exclusive to Pathfinder 2e, right? They're kind of independent of any system. They still allow D20 rolls for some things, but those are the same in D&D and in Pathfinder. So if you have the bestiary from Paizo for 5th edition, you're basically good to go. What about in tone or in like resource management? I'm trying to think if there's anything that I would want to personally change running it in 5th edition.
Pathfinder 2e is closer to 5e in terms of things like rests and resource management. Like, it's not exactly the same, but you're not likely to run into like pacing issues. Probably. Again, I would have to go through it and double check, but my feeling is that for the most part, this is going to be really, really smooth. This would probably, you should be able to run it almost exactly as it's written and just implement 5e monsters and hazards where relevant.
Yeah, I would say, the thing to keep in mind is the classes are, basically exactly the same. So if you're about to start the campaign, right, the advice that is given on, hey, there are some classes that really, really work better or more thematically with the adventure. So honestly, you can play anything, but if you're on the fence, for a paladin, pick Oath of the Ancients or Oath of the Crown over, Oath of Vengeance, because the Fae in the natural world or kingdoms are really thematic for this adventure. And so I would give that kind of advice on like choosing character options for this one.
That's a good point. The other thing I was thinking of is that Pathfinder 2e has specific exploration rules and an exploration mode, which obviously doesn't exist in 5e. I guess the only pitfall there is that if you wanted to use that, you would have to do some wrangling, but I'm pretty sure you could just ignore that. Ignore anything that it writes about, like when you're in exploration mode or what specific types of rolls you might need to make. But yeah,
I would just borrow any of the mini rules that exist online for kind of an exploration turn of X or Y number hours or days for doing hex crawls. I think they're all pretty system neutral for any D&D or D&D clone thing, and use those for the hexploration part of the campaign.
Yeah, I have not looked into this, but I am positive that somebody, maybe several somebodies, have already done this work. In addition to the monster conversions, somebody has almost certainly written how just like a full on, if not like, word by word, but like, here's some tips for converting it. This is, as we have mentioned, one of the most popular modules ever to exist. And there have always been tons of fan adjustments, conversions, lots of like neat tools for ways to change the adventure. So I would check Reddit, but I think you're going to have an easy time with this.
Yeah, I would not worry about the conversions too much. And in some ways, 5e will work great for this because of the slightly more flattened challenge rating things. You can really let players off. They can go explore an area that might be a little too high or low level for them, and it can still be kind of challenging. Yeah. I think the only thing is to maybe be aware of is that in exploration, classes that are spellcasters that get all their spells back on a short rest, so that narrows it down to the warlock class, maybe work a little less well, might be slightly more powerful in that one aspect of the game. But that's one of those things, like, see if it's actually a problem at your table before you really need to worry about it.
Thank you, Lulsworth, for the letter.
Yes.
Here's one from Aaron. Aaron writes, "Dear DM Matt Rob," which is great. I like this. This is a great way to Maat Rob. "Sounds like Theros was a good first draft that needs revision by a team of huge Florkin history classics nerds. With your deep knowledge of the TTRPGing universe, do you think you could put out a call for a crack team of writer, editor, artist heroes to Patreon this into existence? It's just giving me a headache. If you don't come through, then I'm afraid Theros 2.0 is just going to split out of my noggin fully and badly formed. Keep wearing them. Call me colors. Aaron."
Awesome.
Great. Yes.
I hope it does. Hope it does, Aaron.
This is, don't let us stop you. I encourage you to come up. Theros isn't bad, but if you are passionate about classics, then you will probably come up with something better or more interesting. So one, go for it. But two, there are lots of classics inspired modules and games, like not just for D&D, that you can draw or steal from. Matt made me a note, Odyssey of the Dragonlords, which is a
Sure, yeah, that's what I was going to bring up.
Sorry, go ahead. That's a really good one.
There's a 300, it's not perfect, but there's like a 370 page full, adventure, like levels 1 to whatever, and campaign setting inspired by like classical mythology called Odyssey of the Dragonlords. Fully compatible with 5th edition. And if you wanted to write your own, more interesting Theros, I would say that would be my source number one to steal stuff from.
This is, I keep making promises, so I'm not going to make any promises, but on my long list of things that I would like to do is some like brief tinkering treatments. I am a classics nerd. I unfortunately read all of these things, too many times, spent too much time learning about Greek and Roman myths. So Theros didn't immensely bother me, but the areas where I thought it could be better were immediately obvious. So, this is something that we may work on in the future, but check out Odyssey of the Dragonlords, and I'll check out, I'll pull up my notes and see if I can find some of the other, because there are lots of classics nerds who do TTRPGs, and there are some good sources to draw from. So we'll make sure that those are in the show notes as well.
If you actually just want to play a game that is like inspired by the classics, fully integrated instead of a classics game with, slapped on a patina of the classics slapped on D&D 5e, check out AGON. This is by John Harper, who wrote Blades in the Dark. And it's a great system. It's an interesting system, and it's all about classics adventures, right? You're the son of Zeus. You're the daughter of Artemis. You are blessed by the Chthonian gods, and you go on, epic Odyssey, style adventures as a party. That is exactly what the whole system is about.
Yeah. Speaking of promises, this has been on our list to review for months, years, which still might happen. I have heard nothing but good things about it. I like everything else that John Harper has done. It is an Evil Hat production, so you should check it out.
Yeah. It's funny, Rob, how Theros, this letter bringing this back to my mind, how Theros, Ravnica, I guess those were the two that got actual hardcover source books, have been completely dropped by Wizards of the Coast after, I'm guessing someone in the higher ups are like, we got to do all this Magic the Gathering crossover. We've got so many more Magic players than D&D players. We need to make them come in. And then like all their books, like Vecna, Eve of Ruin, Planescape, the Domains of Dread that were like supposed to be cross setting and bring in all these settings, completely forgot that these books ever existed.
I complained about this when it happened because it was transparent and cynical and annoying to me. But they were like, let's cross-pollinate. Let's get some Magic players to buy D&D and vice versa. Clearly it did not work, which I could have told you. I'm glad that they decided to stop doing it and now are... What's the most recent? Oh, right. Like there's like Fallout Magic cards now. Fucking stupid. Anyway, it's all dumb and cynical. I guess I'm glad that D&D players are recalcitrant and, curmudgeonly enough to like not really engage with Magic the Gathering as a setting. By the way, if you like that, Ravnica and Theros were not that bad. And
there's been worse things.
Some synergy. So don't let us being haters. Oh, Strixhaven, that was the other one.
I forgot about Strixhaven, man.
Yeah, nothing wrong if you liked those. I felt like it was all very, very like, here's corporate says you have to make a Magic the Gathering campaign setting.
Yeah, it's like it really felt like the D&D team like got an email that's like, you got 6 months to make a setting for whatever. And by the way, you can't make it more interesting.
That's right. You can't do anything.
You can't violate
right.
anything that's been established.
You're also not allowed to source any new art, and you can only use existing lore. Good luck.
Oof. Thanks for the letter, Aaron, and thanks for reminding us of all of our favorite Magic the Gathering settings.
Yeah.
Here's our next letter. Do y'all have, quote, NASA releases a one-shot TTRPG complete with a 44-page rulebook and reference map on your 2024 bingo card? Because I certainly did not. Jesse. And Jesse has sent us a link to NASA's The Lost Universe, which is exactly as Jesse describes, a setting, a map, an adventure, a how to run the adventure, straight from our only slightly good government agency.
I actually sent this to Matt the day that it happened. Unfortunately, like a lot of other things were happening that week, so we have not reviewed it. Consider this extremely up close on our list of things to talk about in coming weeks, because I have not forgotten about it. We have just had other priorities, but I do love NASA, even though it's used to be full of Nazis, and I am excited to read their TTRPG. Listen, we read the the Wendy's one. We were absolutely going to read the NASA one.
The NASA one, having read through it, but not put my full review notes together, seems like a real, just like the Wendy's one, a real passion of the specific creators who I think all work for NASA. But unlike the Wendy's one, it actually seems like really kind of fun and heartening. There's a part of the module where players have to learn some of the secrets of how space-time works, or like the universe and the like Hubble telescope. Anyway, it's very interesting. So yeah, we'll have to add that to the list. Thanks for sharing it with us.
Thanks for the reminder. Let's see. Here is a bit of a different one. This one is from AJ. AJ writes a bit of a personal one. Within the span of about a week, my life has dramatically changed. My girlfriend and I broke up. I moved out of our place, and I'm switching from full-time college to full-time work for the first time. Condolences and/or congratulations, AJ. Change always brings stress, and everything changed. The reason I felt desire to email you fine folks is this. Your podcast was the one that I clung to when I didn't have anyone there for the night, and when I needed to get through the wave of missing my partner, when I didn't have anything else to ground myself. Over the last year or two, your podcast got me from over-prepping and never actually running a game to successfully organizing and DMing my first ongoing campaign. Now your lovely podcast has been that special podcast many of us has had when we just need to feel like someone familiar is talking nearby. Thank you so much for your insightful advice, your passionate politics, and your friendly voices. Just know that folks like me find your work very impactful in various ways. Keep rolling them dice.
AJ, thank you so much. That's so nice.
I find this very thoughtful, and I want to honor your vulnerability with us by being vulnerable with you in return. This has never come up on the podcast, but when we launched it, I had just broken up with my fiance of 5 years. And this project has been important to me for a lot of reasons, but saying it gave me a reason to live is an exaggeration, but it gave me something to do, something to focus on, something to look forward to. And it's helped me. I'm doing much, much better since that happened. But it means a lot to me that anyone would find anything valuable in it. And I hope that the next chapter of your life is positive and encouraging and onward and upward. But I'm really glad that you found it useful, and thanks for listening.
Yeah, it's incredible to get an email like this, and it really makes us feel like doing this podcast is a good thing to do. And echoing Rob's same more elegant words on the next chapter of your life, AJ. it's nice. It's like whatever happens, if you have a group of friends that you can play games with, right? That can be an incredible stabilizing and beneficial relationship.
It's very grounding. It's very stabilizing. Yeah.
All right, here's our next letter. Thanks again, AJ. Hey, you mentioned a few times that the Pathfinder TTRPG shares its name with a mediocre film from 2007, but I want to bring to your attention to the fact that it also shares the name with a really great Sami film from 1987.
I've never heard of this. It's a Sami Finnish film, and just looking at the poster, it looks sick. I want to watch this. Looks super cool.
It's nice to know that there's a car, a bad film, and a cool film.
And a cool film.
That all share the name Pathfinder.
This next one says, I don't know if you read this or care. We do, and we do. But to back up your point of Daggerheart uses the cool stuff from other systems, it also applies to their dice system, being extremely similar to the one used in Swords Without Master from Worlds Without Master number 3.
Yeah, this is a Forge, kind of game, built in the Forge forums and
forged in the Forged forums.
Yes, and the letter writer is absolutely right that there's this mechanic of rolling 2 dice of different colors, and whichever one's higher determines kind of the cadence of what's going on. Kind of similar to the Hope and Fear mechanic, but a little bit different. It's. This letter reminds me of how it's just so great that you can take practically any system and start tracing roots back to other things. Every system seems to have this incredible, like, branching evolutionary lineage.
Somebody was talking about this, but yeah, a sort of like a family tree or a genealogy of RPG mechanics would be a amazing and beautiful thing to do someday. It would be infinite in its complexity, but it would be a very cool thing to work through.
Absolutely. It would be too hard to do, but maybe someone with a lot of time on their hands can do it. John and Brendan, thank you both for those messages. Here is, I think, our last letter of the episode. Thanks, everyone, for sticking around. And the letter is, I just discovered your show, and you sparked an idea that I had for a while. I was listening to the one-shot episode and then your open table episodes. I've been wanting to make XCOM as an RPG for about 6 years. I was trying to find the system that I would think would work well for it. I think I'm going to use the Twilight 2000 Free League Edition. I really like the ideas you gave in these 2 episodes. Each session of this can be a mission, and whoever shows up brings one of their agents. Each session, the players can choose between 2 to 5 missions. Depending on the mission they complete, would change the world in a way, and any missions that they don't will also have an impact on the world in a different way. I have not learned whose voice is whose yet in your podcast, so I can't ask my direct question directly to the person, but one of you mentioned XCOM as an open table game. Does that DM have any suggestions? Vincent.
So Vincent, I'm the XCOM fan. Rob, the one with the pleasant dulcet tones and perfect mid-Atlantic accent. That's me.
Yes.
Yeah. So when I said XCOM, I think what I was talking about was what I like about OSR games and what I like about. I like the procedural generation of XCOM. I like the story that evolves through sort of like the random chance, like one of your soldiers, dies horribly and gets memorialized and you get replaced them with somebody else, or one of them receives an injury and they're scared of mutons for the rest of the game. I love how sort of just like random things happening sort of helps you sort of build the story. And that's what I kind of like about OSR games. So to answer your question, I'm not super familiar with the Twilight 2000, but I like what you described, and I think that's cool. The thing. Sorry,
Twilight 2000 is an older role-playing game that I think dates back to the 80s or 90s that Free League Publishing bought the rights for. And then they've released a Year Zero engine version of this. And I think Year Zero engine would be just fine, one for having conditions on your players that tweak it so you have the futuristic stuff. It can be very punishing. So, your players shooting at aliens and missing a lot will be part of it.
Yeah, I think that's, if it's Free League, I think that's a good system for it. And I love your suggestion of choosing between missions and bringing, one of their agents. I think that's a great way to model this. The setting or the game that I have always liked as sort of a analog for XCOM is actually Delta Green, but in terms of setting and feel, I don't know in terms of mechanics if that's going to capture the XCOM sensation, but I would take a look at that because it's a little darker than XCOM, but it is,
it's a lot more investigation as opposed to tactical squad combat. In fact, you should not be doing tactical squad combat, or things might be very bad for you in Delta Green.
But it does have some crossover, at least in terms of setting and feel. But I would
say definitely look at that book, Vincent, in that if you want to, keep your open table XCOM idea, but add a little more things that are not just like a raid mission where like, hey, we, really one thing that XCOM can't do well, right, because it's a video game, is have this like narrative and interaction between characters and NPCs in the world, because video games are limited by like a dialogue tree and you're not. So Delta Green would have a lot of great ideas and things to steal from for doing those investigations so that they can plan their mission.
I will say that I think the structure that you have described is great, and I think that the Free League is a great chassis to build on. I just think if you're going to, there's a lot of cool stuff for you to draw from to make this your own. So thanks for sharing, Vincent. This is a really cool idea, and I would love to hear how it goes.
Yeah, if you wanted to do a near future sci-fi open table, I couldn't think of a better idea than like you're part of a squad and some of the squad is coming on this mission and it's whoever shows up to the open table game that night, and then here is the roster of open missions. I would say don't give yourself too much extra work to do by saying that the missions the players don't pick are now discarded and the world changes because they didn't do them. Because are you going to prepare 6 missions for your players every time and they only choose one, and the ones they don't do have an effect? You can still, reuse and recycle.
Make sure you find a way to reuse them, because unlike a video game, you cannot instantaneously procedurally generate a new map, a new mission, a new objective, enemies, and all that. So get good at repurposing the things that you have already done.
And I don't know too much about XCOM, but I would say the other useful thing is to, like make a fun map of like a city or a research area or a country that the players are in charge of liberating, or have an ultimate goal of doing X, Y, and Z here to kind of guide their what missions to do.
Even without knowing, you have captured one of the great joys of XCOM, which is looking at a map. It is very much it is 50% tactical combat and 50% map staring, which is why all the nerds love it.
Well, that means you got to make your players a map, and as we said in our open table episode, giving your players a map is the easiest way to do an open table.
Yeah.
Good luck with this, Vincent. Sounds like lots of fun.
Thank you, everybody, for writing in. If you have other questions, we will eventually get to them. Please do continue to write us. We always appreciate your feedback.
You can send us those letters at DMofNone@gmail.com.
You can also just message us on the Discord. You can send us a message on the Patreon. We will see those. We see them less consistently than the ones that we see in our email. So if you want it answered quickly or reliably, definitely email us. But we also check our Twitter DMs, so you can hit us up at any of those places. We do love to hear from you.
Yeah. And if you enjoyed the show and want more, as we said before, patreon.com/Dungeon Master of None, or we'd really appreciate it if you review the show or leave us 5 stars on your podcast platform of choice. Thanks.
Thank you. And whatever you do, folks, keep rolling them dice.